the evolution of a presentation that I gave last year at a conference called EV Roadmap, which is where I met Jan, who invited me up here to come talk. And that event was primarily focused on the short term. So driving forward EV adoption over the next 5 years in line with the President's goal of having 1 million electric vehicles on the road by 2015 and so on. But the organizer of the conference asked me to, as part of my presentation, take more of a long view. So look out over the coming decades and where we ought to be headed from a transportation perspective. So first up, a roadmap of the next 15 minutes or so. When you're trying to get somewhere, it's helpful to know not just where you're trying to get, but where you are and how you got there. So I'm going to start out with the articulation of what I consider an incontestable goal, and then rewind to the beginning, give us a little short history of modern transportation, a little side detour about what we're doing down in Eugene, Oregon on Arcimoto, and then accelerate into a discussion of 3 convergent future technologies that have a chance to get us to where we're trying to go. So what is that right destination? A destination, simply stated, is as a culture, we must have a sustainable transportation system. When we talk about transportation electrification, we talk about radically increased efficiency. What we're really talking about is sustainability. And you think about the word sustainability. A sustainable system is one that does not crater over time. The system that we have for moving people and goods right now is on an unsustainable trajectory, and we maintain that course at our great peril. So how did we get here? Let's go all the way back to the beginning. In this case, the beginning is 1900, the dawn of the internal combustion age. You could tap some ground in Texas, a bunch of oil geysered out. It was cheaper than dirt. There was no awareness at all of the external effects of just torching all of that energy. And there were no cars on the road. So the cars that families bought, that people bought, had to perform many functions, from pulling the plow to taking goods to market, and they were expensive. So typically you wouldn't have a 3 or 4 car family. You'd have one vehicle that had to perform all functions. The mass production techniques pioneered by Ford, as well as General Motors' creation of the first consumer credit bureau in 1919, made cars affordable, and adoption skyrocketed. In 1919, there were just 6.7 million cars on the road in America, but just 10 years later, by 1929, there were more than 4 times that number, about 27 million. The car promised freedom. It could carry a full family for hundreds of miles on a seemingly inexhaustible, domestically produced source of energy. And manufacturers began to differentiate on styling, on brand appeal, on marketing messaging, and so on. As the automobile ascended, mass transit declined. What a lot of people, certainly people my generation and younger, don't realize is that in the early half of the 20th century, almost every major American city had a robust electrified rail network for efficiently moving people around. LA, which today is sort of a transportation disaster, was once held up as a shining example of a great mass transit system. And you can see the picture of the lower deck of the Bay Bridge in San Francisco was almost entirely rail tracks. But by the 1950s, partly due to economic trends, partly due to actually direct action on the part of the automotive and oil companies, mass transit was in great decline. The rails got paved over, trains got scrapped. By 1970, there were more than 100 million passenger cars on the road in America. And the negative consequences of that transportation pattern were becoming more and more apparent. Smog, freeway parking lots, despite dedicating an ever-increasing amount of our civic landscape to the warehousing and movement of cars. Where we once domestically produced all of our transportation energy, by the 1970s, domestic oil production had peaked and begun to decline, and we had to make up for that lack in the global marketplace. Despite the brief focus on efficiency that was brought about by the OPEC oil embargo in 1973, the American trend towards oversized and inefficient vehicles continued, culminating with the invention of the sport utility vehicle. So even though the dominant vehicle usage pattern is one, sometimes two people traveling a relatively short distance with a relatively small amount of stuff, whether you're going to the grocery store for a gallon of milk, going to work, going to school, and so on, the dominant tool for the job is a 4,000 or 5,000 pound vehicle powered by gasoline, which brings us to the present day. The peaking of domestic oil production in the 1970s presaged the peaking of global oil production in the last decade. And though global oil production has plateaued and even now begins to decline, demand has not. Despite the fact that we're in the midst of a somewhat sideways economy, anemic here locally, China and India are picking up slack, and the price of a barrel of Brent crude oil is once again over $100 a barrel. As distressing, the geopolitical and environmental consequences of the extraction of this diminishing resource are becoming more and more apparent, whether we're talking about fluctuating weather patterns, rising sea levels, catastrophic spills brought about by both negligence and just the increasing level of difficulty at getting at the oil reserves that remain. Our sort of sprawl, happy, pave the earth method of transportation development has yielded now more than 45 million miles of roads worldwide. 45 million miles is almost half of the distance from the Earth to the Sun. And what's particularly interesting about that is that not only do we power our vehicles with oil, but we actually pave the roads with oil. So as the cost of oil goes up, the cost to maintain our transportation infrastructure that's necessary in order to accommodate oversized and inefficient vehicles is putting a huge strain on public finances that are already strapped due to economic recession. So what's clearly needed is a radically more efficient solution. If only somebody had invented a vehicle, perhaps a vehicle designed for that common usage trip, short-range trips, simple, ordinary transportation problem. And in fact, somebody did invent such a device more than 100 years ago. It's called a bicycle. It's the most efficient form of transportation humanity has ever invented. Powered by burritos, direct drive, full environmental engagement. Unfortunately, this fine invention doesn't actually work as a solution to the sustainable transportation problem of today, in as much as it hasn't solved. Right? Despite the existence of a radically more efficient solution, people still drive large, polluting, very inefficient vehicles for their daily trips. But while the bicycle itself might not replace the car and solve our mass market sustainable transportation problem of today, perhaps we can point the way to the automobile's next evolution. The World English Dictionary defines car as a road vehicle, typically with four wheels, powered by an internal combustion engine, and able to carry a small number of people. Now, the second part of this highlighted section is what the entire automotive industry is focusing on today, which is the transition to a radically more efficient drivetrain. Something like 3 times as energy efficient as a gas engine. Electric motor is quiet, clean, has instantly available torque, and can be powered by renewable resources. This, what I would consider the sort of the mother of all transportation no-brainers, is finally beginning to gain traction. But the drivetrain is really only half of the story. You see, when you yard out the gas motor and the gas tank from a full-size car and you replace it with an electric motor and controller and power electronics and batteries, the math doesn't actually work. You end up with a vehicle that doesn't go as far as people are expecting from a full-size car, and it carries a significant premium in terms of price tag. So, like the bicycle, the full-size electric car is a solution really only for a narrow segment of the market, and thus not a solution for mass market sustainable transportation for all of us. So I founded Arcimoto to help address the other part of that definition of car. Arcimoto is a clean transportation company. we're developing an ultra-efficient electric vehicle platform and product. The name Arcimoto means